Okay, so basically this is a workshop, a part of workshop, which is the originals. Also, there are two repos, which is the one is workshop and the other one is not. You can see the actual full application is available in this link here. So if you're interested to take the entire workshop, just contact me. But it's something like a 5 days thing, and it's I charge some amount of money for that, for the effort. So you can just choose a pitching, etc. So we're not going to cover that, but we're only going to cover the Giraffe integration. And if you have any questions, just stop me at any time, and we can just continue. Well, let me move the audience to here. So speaking of Giraffe, let's just briefly cover what Giraffe is about, very briefly. So it's as you might know, a Giraffe is a wrapper, I mean, on top of run-of-the-mill Kestrel. There were previous attempts to do the similar thing, like there were firmwares like Suave, maybe you guys know. And the thing is, these other F# alternatives try to come up with their own HTTP framework as well, whereas Giraffe is just a middleware on top of ASP.NET pipeline. Just find other proper documentation actually. Giraffe's documentation is a bit confusing to find, for me at least. But basically, once you use Giraffe, there's only one single type that's very important to keep in mind, where it's called the HTTP handler. And HTTP handler is something that accepts an HTTP func. As a second part, it accepts an HTTP context, and then it actually returns a result. Whereas you can see what is HTTP func, then it's something about it's a function that takes another context, and then you just return a result. And what's the result is it's a task of HTTP context option. The context is coming from ASP.NET, so by using this context, you can access to request details or other things. And what I like about Giraffe is that it's as you might know, unlike the conventional ASP.NET, which relies on a lot of magic and attributes, it just relies on composition. And there are three fundamentals of Giraffe, I would say. You should just keep it in mind. The continue, return, and skip thing. So there are three different ways. Typically, when you use Giraffe, well, the continue means if you have a set of pipelines, the continue approach will say, well, I'll execute my code, then execute the next HTTP handler on the pipeline way. And what you do is you just use this following syntax. As you will see, typically in every HTTP handler is something that accepts a next func as an HTTP func and context. And well, in this case, it doesn't return anything, but it also returns an optional of task. Here, the second approach, return early, and the document explains it here as, for example, when you have authentication and if authentication fails, you would like a short circuit. You don't want to continue because the authentication is failed, right? You don't want to execute the subsequent pipelines, and then you just either use return early, or well, you just return some context. And there's a skip part where it also gives an example. It's just like, for example, it's used by the choose. Sorry, when you have something like choose, the built-in handler of the get is just actually, well, I want to check if this thing is just get. If it's not, then try the next HTTP handler. So that's the difference between these three. Is this clear? So this is something you should keep in mind, and it's actually probably the most confusing part. You can reread this documentation. As I said, you have three options for every handler: they continue, turn early, or skip. And there's plenty of documentation, but we are not going to cover it further. Now, I assume you have you have this thing is open. So once you open, it should ask you to run this thing under container. Did you have the same experience? Any problems with that? I think this is not in the container right now. Yeah, so you should see this button.
Do you need a specific extension for that dev container?
Yeah, there's a dev container extension if you haven't. So what I have in my system, so this was somewhat covered by the previous weeks. You need a Docker desktop and dev container. If you don't have it, that's fine. You can still work on. It's just so you can still follow up and complete the workshop. So now my screen looks like this. Okay. If you are in the screen, you just try to build things up. It should also invoke the restoration process, right? Does anyone have any problem with this? Any questions? So in the previous one, we have covered the fake and packet, but I'm not going to talk about this. And there's no fake here integrated. If you look at my project, you will see there's only some project called server. Just see, sorry. Yeah, I mean, it's optional, but it's good that if you could set it up. And well, it was surprising. It says that the project is loading, which is not a good sign in general. Let's try reloading once more. Yeah, so that thing should be gone. You shouldn't see if you were like that. So we have these extensions, and you have a single project. And what we are going to do is we are going to run the first attempt. We are going to run the server side. So we go to SRC, and then we go to server. And the first thing I'm going to do is .NET watch. So this should attempt to start the server. And once you do that, you will end up with an error, an exception actually, and which states that well, it throws an exception. And the reason is this intentional, because I'll somewhat expect you to complete these things with me. And so let me just explain. One of the underestimated part is I think there's a newer switch for that in .NET 8, invariant globalization in the project file as well. You can specify. But one of the things that I like to specify is when my application started, I like to set the current thread culture to the invariant. The reason being is, if you don't do that, then you are at the mercy of the server that you're running. Let's say, and in particular, I'm originally Turkish, and if you have a Turkish client, you will see that some countries use comma, some countries use dot for decimal separators. And Turkish, for example, is a very problematic language because they have different I's for capital I and with dot, and there's a capital I with dot. Essentially, it's the uppercase of smaller I. So you should be careful. So the question is this. Although this is not very F# and Giraffe related, I am just trying to convey the best practices. What would you write here? So try to Google out. I'll just stop for a minute, and then I'll just show the answer. And this is typically the first thing. So I'm trying to actually approach a real life application. What would I do in a real life project? And this is one of the first things. For any kind of project, I'll set the culture. Well, you may not want to set the culture. Maybe you really need to dedicate culture. That's also fine. Any ideas? I think Chris does know the answer, so. Yeah. Okay. So what I would do?
Do we
yeah.
do we set the culture into HTTP context? Is it value or a variable for that, or in HTTP context?
I'm not aware. So what I do is I do the following. Here's my answer. So this is the very first thing I do in my project. It says that all the default threads that is created should be using the invariant culture. Well, assuming that you want to stick with that. Now, let's talk about what's invariant culture. So let me give you a hint. It's right now almost identical to NUS culture. Then why do I not use the NUS culture and just use the invariant culture? What do you think? What is the difference between NUS and invariant? Any ideas? What could it be? Well, the answer is in the naming. So obviously, invariant culture is invariant. That means maybe a year later,
I don't know.
United States people gather up and they say, well, we are going to use commas for decimal separators. Maybe they'll change their mind, right? And then all your code will break. So invariant culture will never change. So that's the difference, actually, primarily. So you need to be careful because .NET is very unforgiving. If you try to parse wrong decimal comma thing, you will end up with very, very, very unexpected results. Once you fix that, let's try to run our project again. We'll gradually go by step. And then we end up with another exception. So before doing that, let's just skim the file. Let's just talk about it. So the second thing after setting up the culture is that the second thing I do is this setting up the logging itself. So that's what my function here. Because now from this point on, something can go wrong, right? And I like to have the logging in effect. The Bootstrap logging, if you look at that, this is done via Serilog. The problem with the Serilog or any kind of logger you use, so Serilog is one popular logging framework, is that there's actually, we'll set up the logging differently, but before logging setup, our application can crash. And this happens a lot in ASP.NET. For example, if you try to host things in Azure or something like that, misconfiguration, and then you end up with a lot of unexpected things, and you don't see any logs because your ASP.NET pipeline hasn't set up. So what you want is you want to establish a Bootstrap logger that could tell you something that went wrong even before the ASP.NET starts. And this snippet code is just doing that essentially. And there's an helper. This is coming from the Serilog where it does this for you. This part of the Serilog, and you can check the documentation about it. It's not something I've written. And then we'll just revisit these parts a bit later. Let's come to the end. So now we have the famous minified API, right? ASP.NET guys come with the minified version, which is fine. But I still like to stick to the little bit more boilerplate hosted version. Maybe I'm because old-minded, or just I still want to keep what I know, keep doing what I know. But I like that it offers me quite a lot of flexibility. So I have an entry point where my entry point is just doing building configuration, the configuration builder, the user secrets. If you have, why do I have this self? The reason is that you need to point to the current assembly. And that's why I made up a self type, just to point to my current assembly. So it's just an arbitrary thing.
Because ASP.NET Core is looking for kind of a program class, right? And this is kind of the reason they need kind of an entry point. Yeah.
Yes, that's true. That's true. So then you will see another peculiar thing in my setup, something called @Hawkon file. Has anyone heard of Hawkon before? It's perfectly normal. I don't think I have ever heard someone who has heard it besides people who use ASP.NET. Sorry, Akka.NET. So Hawkon is something I recommend you to consider it. If you use up.json, it's not like a JSON format. It's actually a superset of JSON. We can just look at what's wait, sorry. So there's a documentation about Hawkon. And basically, it's actually like a JSON file, but it's actually it offers you some other facilities, such as, for example, it gives an example here where it actually, if you have two different, for example, JSON file, it can merge them. Okay, and there are a lot of, you can do substitutions. You can define arrays, unlike the regular, and you can write comments. Well, you can write comments in JSON, up.json, but actually, I think it was an awful idea to come up with a JSON as a configuration file, because JSON format does not support comments. And then they just use a hijacked version of JSON, which doesn't obey the specs. So it's something I would recommend. But if you don't like it, that's just all fine. To do so, there's another extension, and there's another DLL in the NuGet packages. You can just see here something like Hawkon extension configuration. You need to install this, and once you install that, you just you can use it. Again, it's optional. You can just completely ignore my advice, but it is something I prefer in my day-to-day configuration. And I finally, once I add the configurations, I just add the environment variables, and then this brings us the error that we are getting, and which is very trivial. What should I type here? That's somewhat trivial compared to the previous. There was a question, by the way. Why do I use cell? So cell is just like I'm referring to my current. I need a type in the current assembly. Okay. So this is just an arbitrary fictitious type. It has never used. And the use case is that the add user secrets require you to point it to the assembly. Okay. And the thing is, yeah. So I just use this thing just to tell ASP.NET, hey, this is the assembly, you need to check it out. Because add user secrets, just look at this. If you use a user secret, if you don't use it, that's not a problem. It just makes use of some sort of ID. So the answer to this thing is just config that. Sorry, config builder. That build. Well, this is standard ASP.NET. It's not something super secret. And well, okay. Once I do that, notice I haven't used actually the config file, which is a different story. So we are not even passing it. But once if you need to pass this thing, you can just pass to wherever you like. In this exercise, it's not used at all. You will see there's some sort of interesting boilerplate code, which I'm not going to discuss. This is not very relevant. But what is relevant is that one of the things is that we need to fix this here. So when your application is crashing, as you would know, by the way, in F#, there is no try, catch, final block. You need to nest try, and then you define it finally. And this is the way to have try, catch, final block in F#. A little bit counterintuitive. And here, if you're familiar with Verilog, we need to say a meaningful way to how would you close and flush the logs. What would that be?
Log.close and flush, something like that.
The reason is that we do that, well, for anything that if our application crashes for anything, there might be, for performance reasons, Serialog might have some of the logs in the buffer, and we definitely don't want to lose them. So that's just ensures these logs are just emitted, and that's it. The threading is the status code. So basically, you're saying that, well, if something went wrong, we want to return -1, and then otherwise everything. So this is not important, and actually this didn't help at all for the thing. So we have a couple of other errors. One of the things I like is I like to log the current username into the logs. If someone has logged someone, so let's say there's some sort of logging we are doing, and we would like to utilize some sort of logging. For that, let's visit here, and so I'm going to show you how to use middlewares through Giraffe or ASP.NET in 2 different ways. One is the writing a class name, which is very conventional way of doing things. So what would it be? So here you would see that I'm still using Serialog, and I'm saying that, well, I would like to push a property, and the property name is this username, and basically capture the value if there's any username, and then push that property. Once you do this, for any request that is logged, the username property will be attached to that. That's my objective. What will be here?
You have to call next.
David, would you please? Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, so, well, it's not very difficult. So this is a standard way of utilizing. And I just do this, and then that's it. Just make sure that this middleware is ready to use. We are not yet done. Let's look at this. What else we have in this file? So this, I created a dedicated module to Serialog logging. So Serialog may not be the logger you use, but this is what I use. So we discussed this. This part just introduces the logger bootstrapping part, and this part makes sure, well, if you have any error, we are going to well, not just errors, sorry, actually. For any request or response or any kind of things, we're actually customizing the template. So if you use Serialogs to log your request and response, for example, this is a default template I'm going to use. And notice the username is here. And Serialog doesn't know about it. But we now, by writing this line, we made sure that Serialog now knows about it. Okay? So these are just customizing the templates of Serialog. And this part is, well, it is the actual Serialog configuration. Well, it's pretty much standard. So we get the logger configuration from our side that will pass through, and we basically say, well, if I'm in debug mode, I like to use on the debug mode. Otherwise, informational. I like to use Microsoft and Giraffe level things to warning. If you're hosting things in Azure, this will help you to get rid of the always on messages. If you have any, well, this is a little bit my convention. I like to exclude some of the stuffs that I find annoying. So these 3 lines, these 3 statements are just doing that. And when it comes to logging, what I like is I like to use the compact JSON formatter. So this is sometimes like it logs things in JSON formatter, and it's not very readable by humans. So you need to use another. I use Seek from there's a web application called Seek, SEQ. So that can ingest. That's also created by the Serialog's creator. That can ingest Serialog logs as well if you create this formatter. And your rolling interval makes sure that every day these are, yeah, that's correct. Every day we have this log files are just permitted. I also like to do written things on the console. And this part is that it's coming from a different framework where it makes sure, because the F# types aren't very Verilog friendly by default. And this thing is, if you put this thing, is just make sure whatever you log in an F# form are actually Verilog friendly. And this also comes from another separate DLLs. Let's just look at it. They did some of the DLLs we are using again. Packet references. Yeah, this is coming from here. This library, this NuGet package, this structurama.f#, which is a bit funny name. But I think there are alternatives as well to that. Any questions about Verilog? So this particular line shows that if you have an active Seek installation, which is in the chat window, you can see, you can just actually, I recommend you to doing this. First of all, Seek is free to use for single person. And it can install in a Docker container, which is fairly trivial, one-liner on your command line. And then actually that gives you an easy way to diagnose the loggings. And the last 3 lines is just for Azure integration. If you have application insights, these are the statements you would use. If you use AWS, it's a different story, which I'm not going to cover. And I don't know the answer because I don't use it. Cool. So let's just visit the error. Yeah.
Just one question regarding application insights integration. So that means Verilog is also capable to automatically connect to application insights. They have kind of a data adapter towards application insights.
Yes.
Okay.
So you will see if you open application insights, then you will see your logs there, and it's structured somewhat.
Okay.
Okay. So let's go to our program and back to our program. And it was complaining about line. What line? 121? Nope, that's not it. It's 64. Yeah, so it actually complains about these things. So I'll just show you two different ways of using the middlewares. One is the class way, and all you do is this one. And actually, they are doing the same thing. You just pass this use middleware and pass the class name, which is the OOP way. The other way, which is more idiomatic, you can pass the middleware this way. So, and we just get rid of this thing. So this way now our logging is set up with Giraffe. And I would recommend you to, well, you can just have your multiplication, but this setup somewhat works for me. We have pretty robust logging installed. The next thing we are going to do is still complain about use throttling troll. So let's just visit the throttling troll. Who knows about rate limiters? Has anyone heard? Yeah. Okay. Can you explain why we need it?
For at least, let's assume you have public endpoints and you want to protect that somebody is smashing your endpoints, then you could set at least request limits to those endpoints where you say, I'm accepting whatever 10 requests within a certain time range. So there are different strategies that you could apply to that one to at least protecting your endpoints.
Yeah, very true.
It's kind of a DDoS protection as well. So
very true. And actually, there now in .NET 7 or 8, I think we have come with something built into the ASP.NET. There's a rate limiter, but I read the documentation. I was always confused. I don't know. That's my impression. So I use an alternative framework called Throttle and Throw, which works well for me, which is also developed by a Microsoft employee, but this is not an official part of .NET Framework. And what you do is you actually set up some rules. Let's look at this. So you just create a configuration file and you set up some rules. And the rules are like, one of the rules is stating that the URL pattern, you just say, well, for this URL pattern, for example, you have a login mechanism. in my case, for a real life application, actually, if you complete this workshop, I use this for maybe sending emails. And I don't want someone to come up and writing a boat and causing me sending thousands of mails, right? I need to protect myself. And this thing just states that, well, this could be invoked by the same IP as long as it's 5 times per minute. As well, I also add a further reinforcement. Not only that, but I also further restriction, but also 7 times per 10 minutes as well. So you can just augment your URLs, and they're still pointing to the same URL. And let's say we have a different fictitious, we have a URL called verify. Can you do the same thing? All you have to do is to copy and paste this thing, actually. Inside this thing. You need to copy paste and then just change the URL. For this URL.
So this will actually prevent brute force attack.
Yes. And the endpoint user will get, well, it's configurable actually, but this configuration will tell them that they will get 429. Server is busy. That's what they will get if they try that. So you should secure your application from day one. And these are somewhat underestimated steps: the logging, the culture. So what I'm trying to show you is just a little more like a more realistic applications. I don't know the answer if we could use the diagram, if we could use outside of it. Yeah, actually, what your question makes sense a lot. And my expectation probably might be, or we can just use a portion of the code. But I don't know. So, well, this is very trivial. I just ask you to copy and paste. But also, I've seen a lot of times copy paste goes wrong. So you just need to change this part to verify if you have such a URL. And that's it. Okay. And to fix this, we need to introduce this throttling troll to our application, which is going to be here. What it will be? Can you complete that? So if you look at this module, you'll see there's something called set options. And I think where you put this also somewhat matters. So where I would put is, I will probably prefer something a little bit under the static files. Probably I wouldn't worry about the someone's throttling my static files. I wouldn't worry about much, but I would put it here. And this works. Okay. So once we complete that, save the file. Let's look at the next challenge. I think we don't have any challenge, does it? It's just clear. There's a lot of stuff. Yeah, you see, now it doesn't complain at all. Are we good? So let's try to run this thing. What port does it run? How do I look at it? Well, if you attended the previous presentation, previous workshop, you would see I would set up this is just inside this dev container file.
Mm.
And right now it's only on HTTP right now. The reason is I just didn't want to mess with certificates. But if you decide to use certificates, you use this kind of things. This is how you define environment variables. And these environment variables are recognized by ASP.NET. So this also says that, well, you're running on this development environment. And this is the URL we're going to use. We're going to use localhost 5010. Okay, once we do that, actually, we get a 500 error. That means that we're still bad. And that says, Well, add a sliding expiration. Well, that's somewhat also trivial. Which line says? Who want to explain what's a sliding expiration? I think it's somewhat not complicated. And what's the line? Is 98.
98 FS program.
Yeah, it's here. So although the authentication part isn't really a little bit not much part of this mini workshop, it will be, I think, one of the next few of them we'll go through the authentication further. And here you can see that by default, I just use this thing. Well, you add authentication, add cookie, and it just says that use sliding expiration. So the option is that options that sliding expiration. Sliding expiration means that once this is set to true, your user, let's say in this case, its expire span is set to seven days. Once your users keep using the application, actually, it will further extend the cookie, actually. Okay. So as long as you keep using the application continuously within 7 days, you're not going. It doesn't show you to login screen, which is annoying if you show it too frequently. However, a big remark: you must use persistent cookies. Okay, which is a little bit again as outside of the scope of this thing, but it will be able to cover it. If you don't use persistent cookies, just setting this won't save you, because the user the difference between persistent cookie and non-persistent cookie is that if you don't persist the cookie, the cookie will be removed once the user closes the tab. So it won't work. So you must use, if you want sliding expiration, well, assuming the user, well, you either rely the user doesn't close the browser, but maybe you want that. That's also an option. If the user closes the browser, they must re-log in. But usually this is the typical behavior. And if you look at the other things here, we use the authorization here, other things. These are pretty standard services to introduce services if you need authorization authentication. So this is how we configure your app. Okay. Any questions? Let's run again. And yeah, another 500.
Yeah, for what purpose you're using application telemetry insights? Application.
Well, this one. Well, this is required if you want the Azure. If you want application insights, this is required.
Ah, that's true, because you have to use then the telemetry client, right? If you want to talk to application insights. Okay, got it. Yeah,
it's required. So yeah, for this workshop, it's not true, but if you host this in Azure, it will help you out. Otherwise, you won't see. Well, now we are going a little bit more down to the more interesting part. Probably, guys, why you are here, the giraffe part. So I also created something called HTTP module. Time, I need to a little bit accelerate. And this part just handles, well, you'll see some sort of hard-coded hash here. Who has used CSP, content security policy? Statistically, so it's a security policy where it actually restricts your browser to where it can access. And statistically, I say that only 6% of websites using CSP. And this is a typical use case, just demonstrating you how you use. So let's say you have external stuff using CSP. I'm just leaving you with this puzzle. Sometimes leaving you with questions is better, because talking about this will take another day almost. You can investigate each part. Why do they exist? But there's also the more complicated part is called corp and coep. So yeah, but the interesting bit is here the expect is just we are setting as cache control. So we would like to, you see that it's set in static options. So we would like to statically cache our static assets. How are we going to do that?
What is the cache control property on the headers? Is it a Boolean property?
No, it accepts something called cache control header value. And I'll just give you just the answer. Probably you need to look it up in Google.
Okay.
And you see it occurs when it's debugged. So here I set anything that is static must be cached for a day. And that's actually the best practice. The good practice is to make it for a year. But careful. If you do so, I mean, you need to find the right balance. If you do so, your static assets will be cached for a year, and the users might be, especially for CSS and other things, you might find yourself in trouble. But not doing so is also equally bad. So what I do is I access my CSS styles by using some sort of a query string, which helps a lot. And for JavaScript side, I rely on the builder hashing.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's it. And this static file options is used where? It's used here.
Static file.
See that? Yeah. Okay, let's try again. Let's handle the next exception. Well, it still say the same thing. No, it's in Cerilog 37. So I think I forgot something like that here. In 37.
37 Cerilog.
It's here. So already set it up, right?
Yeah, it's looking good. Well, again.
Well, first there's still a problem with the 75.
75 it is, yeah.
Oh yeah, it's here. Sorry. So what will this be? Well, that's very trivial. So this is standard idiomatic.
Yeah, you have to call next, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you need to pass the context?
Nope. Here. Well, yes, you need to pass the context. The reason is that this is the signature requires you to do it for middlewares. Okay. Now we move forward. Something. Finally, we managed to see something in the screen. We go to where? What does it say?
Move next.
Yeah. Which file? Giraffe middleware.
Program CS line 38. I guess 38. Yeah.
Well,
program FS.
Let's just search for set status code. Although the error looks like here, actually it's coming from here. And the reason is that we have an error handler here, and this error handler will help you whenever there is an error. We would like to show this on depending on conditions. You want to show something out. Okay, so you can make this development only, etc. Why do you think there's a different settings for? If there's a JSON exception, I'm having a different error, and if there's not a JSON exception, I'm having a different thing. Why do you think? And what will it be? Actually, the only difference is this here.
Leave response.
So whenever a JSON exception happens, I clear the response and I just need to set status code. Whenever something else happens, I just again clear the response and I just set status code. Why do you think? Well, my answer would be vast majority of times, not guaranteed. A JSON exception would occur when you have a serialization error.
Yeah, when you have
that means you end up with a little bit more probably the input is bad. Not guaranteed. I know it's a gross simplification, but it helps. And for other cases, we just do the standard thing. All exceptions should start 500. Yes. So that's the issue. This brings us. Actually, this is an exception. You see that? And the reason it's the exception is just now the text message is coming from here. Actually, it's coming directly from this road, and it's asking the which road. Just made a typo here. Now we came to, let's look at the operators. There's the handlers and the views. So there's, in the handlers, I create this kind of structure. And well, this part is pretty useless, to be fair. I like to create another wrapper sometimes, but I would say it's almost useless. What this code does is entirely calls this code. That's the only thing it does. It's somewhat useless. You will see there's something called env here, env underscore. This is about if you have dependency injection and if you want to partially pass these things, I use this kind of thing, which is not used here. And there's another thing here, which is something like a layout. If you know the master pages in ASP.NET, so a layout is something like that. Okay, it's like the master page. And the interesting bit is that it's actually something that takes an integer and returns a string. The reason it takes an integer is that semantically in a page, your page should have one h1 header, and your subsequent portions of the page should continue with whatever the next level is. If you look at the HTML specification, actually HTML specification says you are actually allowed to have more than one h1. If you search this concept, can a page have more than h1 tags? If you read the Stack Overflow articles, you will see the answer is yes. But the answer is no. The reason is that if you actually try to use the screen reader, and if you don't follow this h1, h2 structure, the screen reader will get completely confused. So the real practice is that your page should have one h1. And the reason is that I'm utilizing this thing is just if you have a sub portion, a subcomponent, you may want to pass what would be the next h level to that subcomponent. Anyway, not so much important for this case, but something I just wanted to mention. So what will be here? The answer is very easy. This line says that you need to choose a root. There's only one root, which is the root container.
Yeah, it's the default root.
Yeah, default root. Yeah. So it's a case insensitive and slash, and default root is just passing the v root with index function. What this function does is you pass a view here, and it wraps it in the master page, which is the layout. Where is this layout coming from? It's here. So it's actually something. If you look at the views, you'll see a layout and an index. So this is our view, and this is the layout. Okay. So our time is short, so I'm not going to. I don't have time to dig this deep through. Yeah. But this just says that, well, I want to use the default root. And then now I think we are about to finish very closely. We had two items missing. So it just shows this print hello world. Now what happens? Let's look at what's happening here. What will it be here? Well, it could be any of your arbitrary HTML code. So now you were using this structured. People like to use this structured HTML, right? That Giraffe offers, and similar thing Fable offers. Yeah, it's fine, but I prefer not to use it at all. The reason is I just fall back to strings. Is actually HTML is far more text-oriented protocol, and there are cases where you work with designers, and your designer give you some sort of HTML code, and good luck with translating to that to strongly typed version. Sometimes you can do. There are even tools for that that can do translation, but then sometimes you can't sync up. So then your designer says, "Oh, I changed this attribute to something like that." Good luck with finding that what that attribute corresponds to in your structured HTML. So what I would recommend is I just utilize the standard HTML and then use this thing. Hello world. As much as I can, I just stick to it, regular strings. Okay. Where is the HTML coming from? It's coming from this here. It's actually a stupid CD function that does essentially nothing. Why do I have it? The reason I have it is that there's an extension here, highlight templates in F#, right? So once that thing sees an HTML tag, then it figures out that it should syntax highlight the string in an HTML format, which essentially does what I want. Okay. See what happens. Now, I think there's one last portion is missing. Yeah, it still didn't work. The last time we see this message, not because it was successful, because it was a thrown exception. So this will be the last bit of it. And now you'll see that what I mean by this utilizing string in a larger format. We are about to finish, guys, by the way. Just bear with me. You'll see, if you look at the layout, well, there's this portion which I use with with and fable interaction, which you can just ignore it. But the most interesting bit is here. So you can see I actually coded the entire HTML by using strings and using the same technique, right? There's a sort of manifest, etc., etc., a lot of mumbo jumbo, and the error is coming from here. What will it be? So notice I have this body thing here, body bang, let bang body. And this is because whatever this body is passed here, I'm just extracting out it. And what's passed here in reality is this thing. This is passed. Okay. And you see there's a 0 here. I passed a 0 because I know that there's so far no H1 tag has happened. Okay. So depending on that, I might pass. Well, for this case, it doesn't matter. But this thing is just returns a string. And then all I have to do is put the body here inside, which is I'm using plain string composition. And that should complete. Works. Let's reload again. Great. Yeah, it was a very fast tour on how would I structure as something close to real life application. So just as a summary, we talked about the culture invariant thing. We talked about bootstrapping the serialization. We talked about well, integrating with Azure Insights. We talked about middlewares. How would I put the user's name into the log things? We talked about how would I construct a general HTTP pipeline, caching. We briefly talked about how would I put CSP, and as well as we talked about a little more master pages and the views, and construct the middlewares, and then how would I put the HTML content as string, and that's pretty much it.
This whole handling of the layout on this and your master pages and yeah, child pages, is that kind of default behavior also when you're working with Giraffe, or is it just your own invented way? It's more like
it's my own invented way.
Okay.
You never see people doing this, but I've been through this in real life. I mean, that's why I'm talking now. So I worked in I was paid for a project where I need to type this thing, and then the stronger type thing is just backfired at me a lot. Then actually, for example, people like, if you know the Blazor, the Bolero, they use an HTML template. They have a what you call type provider for HTML, and they somewhat circumvent. Even we try to use that. Can we use that in here? And well, there's a new project I heard at what was it called? I can't remember, but on Twitter there's something called some guy built a text type provider where you can inject portions of the.
Okay.
Yeah, so it could be used, but even if you don't use it, this approach just works fine. Actually everything I need is here. Syntax highlighting, somewhat strongly typish kind of thing, works well for me. But I know that not everyone is fan of this approach. Some people still like to make it structured way.
Mhm.
Yeah. Does anyone have a question or?
Just a short one. How do you debug? Do you have any recommendations? Like breakpoints maybe or something?
Yeah, well, okay. I have two recommendations. So as far as I know, this is a standard console application, actually. And what you do is here is, well, the only difference between this and being in the different console application is that if you look at this, this has an SDK.web. So there are two ways to debug an F# application. One is, which is I don't recommend doing this. First approach, you just click this one, okay? And that would start. The reason I don't recommend it out of the way is that, let me just put a breakpoint here. Yeah. It actually, okay. Well, it complains because now you need to configure an external terminal because I'm running inside a Docker template. It says I can't open a terminal. Normally it works. If you configure a terminal, I suppose maybe, well, it's, well, you need to do this thing. You need to configure terminal. But even if you do that, the problem with this is that you will have a problem with the paths. Okay. So anyway, what I like to do is another way is that I create. It's available in this project. I create a launch.json file and configure it. And I'm looking for an example here. And just a second. Maybe I'll look at the completed version of the workshop. VS Codes. Yeah, I think I found it. So I can copy and paste this thing here. Okay. This part is important. This part is important. So what I like to do is, and I also need, yeah, is to create a file, something like that, in launch.json file. And this immediately created me a profile like this one. Okay. So this file is very, very easy to create. Notice, for the sake of simplicity, this won't build your code. You need, if you do this, you need to build your code, or you need to create another task that you build the code. Okay. So it says that, well, I want to request launch. The type is core CLR for whatever reason. It points out to this folder. Okay. You need to point your DLL. You can specify the current working directory, what type of console, and you can specify, well, other debugging settings if you want to use, I don't know. Once you do that, now let's press this one. And that works. Now you can debug things as much as you like. So if you're curious where this file came from, I'll just post a link, which is on the tab. And well, that's essentially what I do.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Anything you want to discuss? This is all I'm going to tell. I was going to tell. Thank you for your time listening. Stay tuned with me. We'll further enhance different types of assets. We'll visit the client side, our Fable integration a bit, and yeah, as well as, so we'll try to visit authentication stuff a little bit more. Thank you, and I wish you have a nice weekend, and see you. I'll post a video on internet as on my channel. So yeah.
Cool. Thanks for hosting us. Have a nice weekend too. Likewise.
Yeah, thank you. Bye bye.
Bye guys.